When they first appeared, they brought with them the cold hand of war and the deadly touch of corruption. They slaughtered the weak and the unworthy. They devastated the helpless and the destitute. With a desire to purge the world of weakness and cowards, they are the Warmongers, a fitting name for these vicious females. Clad in some of the best armor the Knight faction can offer, and with deadly corruption feats that can turn a match around in an instant, they single-handedly change the meta of For Honor, for better or for worse. But who are the Warmongers? Surely they have a historical equivalent like the other heroes in For Honor. So let's talk about it. Welcome back to Heroes in History, where we take a look at the For Honor heroes and analyze who they are most likely based on in history and whether or not they do their counterpart justice. Today, it's time to look at Warmonger, or War Mommy as most tend to call her for obvious reasons. But just who are the Warmongers based on? Well, my first thought was probably a cornate berserker.
Abandon reason! No, only war!
Well, okay, maybe not that. But much like I said in the Peacekeeper video, there is no exact historical equivalent. There was no Knight Order of women, and since the Warmongers are exclusively women, we can say for sure they aren't based on a real Knight Order. And yeah, I know that there are people who are going to tell me that the lore says there are male Warmongers too. I remember people saying, dude, there were male Warmongers. Well, I haven't seen them, and I looked on the wiki to see if it was true, and it didn't confirm that. It made no reference to a male, so as far as I'm concerned, they're a female-only club, no boys allowed.
It's your balls, they're gone! What?
And frankly, that doesn't bother me too much. I know that that may sound like heresy to some, because I know a lot of people are very upset about it, including my own brother. For some, it may be an issue, but I honestly don't really care that much. Sure, I'd like a male that wears the, armor of the Warmongers, because I think that'd look cool, but at the same time, if we did that, could we really have our war mommy? I mean, I don't know, it just wouldn't feel the same. A war daddy just doesn't fit as well as a war mommy. I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe that's just personal. Take that with a grain of salt. But alright, all joking around aside, who are they? Well, it's hard to say, but there are a few clues we can look at, starting with her weapon. The wiki calls it a flamberge, which is a bit misleading. A flamberge is not a type of sword, but a type of blade style, which refers to a wavy patterned blade meant to mimic flames. This type of flamberge pattern was popular on the great swords called Zlihanders, which is likely what the Warmonger's weapon is based on. Zlihanders were great swords founded out of Germany, and real Zlihander swords were much bigger than what we see in this game. They could range from longer than a typical longsword to nearly 6 or 7 feet in length and were considered great swords. If they got much longer than this and they were restricted to ceremonial use only, they were strictly two-handed swords. Easily longer than the swords Warmonger is using, the Zlihander sword is probably the closest thing we see here, but these swords give us a clue to Warmonger's origins. But there's more. There's another clue. The clawed gauntlets. Now, you won't see these often in history because they had little practical use. If you're close enough to your opponent to make use of a clawed gauntlet, you should probably just go for a dagger and grapple your opponent to the ground for a stabbing strike, rather than scratching them with your fingers. However, there was a Holy Roman Emperor who was said to have designed clawed gauntlets. In fact, this Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian I, had a passion for armor to the point he pioneered a new kind of armor called the Maximilian armor. We see examples of it that have similarities to Gothic armor, which Maximilian was also famous for wearing and designing, and if you really analyze some of the armor designs, such as the structure of the helmets and the fluting along the armor, you actually see similarities to some of Warmonger's kit. Frankly, it's a little eerie how similar they might look. The Holy Roman Emperor, the Zlihander, both of these aspects provide clues that lead me to a conclusion. I believe that the Warmonger is based on a German mercenary order known as the Landsknecht, an exclusive and skilled group of mercenaries who served the Holy Roman Empire and made up the bulk of its fighting force from 1400 to 1600. These men were famous for their use of a particular weapon, the Zlihander. These men were exceptionally trained. They profited off of war and combat. While they didn't use biological weapons like corruption, they did have access to early firearms, and were infamous for destructive and ruthless tactics. Maximilian began raising the first Landsknecht in 1486, and the first 8,000 became known as the Black Guard. Now, that alone might not be enough, but let's go a bit deeper into the lore. Apollyon, who you could argue was the first warmonger, killed a lawbringer that she considered weak. Ever since, Warmongers seem to have a special disdain for Lawbringers. After all, their natural enemy now is Griffin, a former Lawbringer, and according to the wiki lore, Warmongers are required to get their armor off of their defeated enemy, just like Apollyon, and many of their armor sets seem to be modeled off of Lawbringer-style armor. So is there possibly a feud between Warmongers and Lawbringers? Well, it would make sense historically. The Lawbringers are based on the Swiss Guard and the Swiss pikemen, right? Well, get this. Maximilian was greatly influenced and impressed with the battle prowess of the Swiss pikemen and instructed his Landsknecht in similar fighting styles, armors, and strengths. They often came into conflict with the Swiss pikemen and began adopting Swiss tactics, armors, and weapons into their own arsenal, taking their strengths and turning it against them, not unlike how Warmongers donned the very armor of the Lawbringers. In fact, in the Lawbringer video discussing the relation to the Swiss Guard, I mentioned the famous Battle of the Holy See in which the Swiss Guard held their ground against a tidal wave of mercenaries and soldiers from the Holy Roman Empire. A large portion of those soldiers were Landsknecht. And if that's not meta enough for you, let's go a step further. Some have argued that while dressed in knight attire, warmongers aren't really knights. They don't hold to knight ideals and exist outside of the factions. Well, that also fits. Landsknecht were not knights in the traditional sense. They were mercenaries, and as such, they were not beholden to the rules, chivalry codes, and loyalties knights were. But they did begin to phase out the knights. As currency began to grow more common and was put to more use, feudal systems became less useful and less necessary, and thus the knights faded from the battlefield and the Landsknecht and mercenary groups like them became far more common, or professional soldiers who adopted their tactics. The wiki on Warmonger says that their goal is to convince their followers to abandon their old gods and beliefs and to work towards a new world order or era. The Landsknecht themselves represented a new era of warfare and medieval combat, the era of gunpowder, of currency, of pikes, of mercenaries, and wars for profiteering. Now, looking at pictures of the Landsknecht as we have so far, you'll notice they look very flamboyant and showy more than anything. They aren't wearing the badass armor of the Warmongers, right? Well, there are a few reasons for that. For one thing, armor of that quality is hard to manufacture and very expensive. In a time period where guns are becoming more common, it makes less sense to pay for over 1,000 sets of armor than it does to pay for 1,000 sets of guns. Not only that, but as mercenaries, many Landsknecht might have armed themselves for battle. Now, to be clear, some of these showy outfits you see would not be what they wore in battle, and it's very possible that more wealthy leaders in the Landsknecht would be able to afford quality armor like what we've seen. Plus, can we just take a moment to appreciate the similarities between Warmonger's Gothic armor and the armor of Maximilian? The Gothic armor then would have been present at the time of the Landsknecht, and it's very similar to what we see Warmonger wearing, particularly with the Sabactis, Centribos, and Ramnusia, and others. But let's be fair here. The showy aspect of the Landsknecht might look silly, but even the Warmongers have a flair to them, right? I mean, just look at Disnamia and Melanoe. You can't tell me those aren't a bit on the showy side. I think the final and most telling similarity, though, between Warmonger and the Landsknecht is in their purpose. Warmonger's name literally means to incite and or profit off of war. The Warmongers who helped found Horkos believe firmly that the weak have no place and only the strong will endure. This social Darwinism was actually present in the world of the Landsknecht. Granted, they didn't go around killing the weak to make way for the strong, but only the strong Landsknecht could make money. Only the strong Landsknecht survived battle after battle to reap the profits of war. Only the strong moved up the ranks to lead into larger and more important battles. If you were a weak fighter, you didn't last long in the Landsknecht. You either became unemployed or you died at the hand of the enemy. That's why being a Landsknecht was so rigorous in their training and discipline. This isn't a children's club or a weak little group of hired guns. These were professionals, mercenaries hired only for the most difficult of jobs. The Landsknecht only really began to fade from popularity in Europe due to their more brash and ruthless tactics, which other countries, particularly Spain, pointed at with no small degree of disdain, which granted is a little ironic since Spain themselves had employed Landsknecht in the past. The other reason was the rise in the use of professional armies and militaries. After the Landsknecht turned on the Holy Roman Empire when they couldn't receive their payment and attacked the Vatican, it became clear to the world that mercenaries, while valuable assets when the money is good, might not always remain loyal if that well dries up. But the legacy of the Landsknecht still lives on. The Warmongers might not please all tastes, but they are an incredibly deadly, skilled, and fearsome warrior group. Their ideals, their armors, their weapons, and their cunning are second to none, and they demonstrate their lethality on the battlefield. While not a perfect representation of the Landsknecht, I'm certain that the ancient mercenary groups would have been quite pleased with the Warmongers being their representative and for honor. After all, what's the point in going to war if not for a cause worth dying for? Even one others might not fully respect. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.